Welcome to DIY DEI. My name is Tawanna Streater, and I will be your host. I wanted to provide a platform for people of color to learn the basics of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also the fundamentals of incorporating activities and strategies into their everyday work. So today I have with me Danata Andrews, the Vice President of Inquest Consulting. So Danata, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me, Tawana, as your first guest. I'm truly honored. My name is Danata Andrews, Vice President of Client Development at Inquest Consulting. We are a full-service diversity, equity, inclusion firm headquartered right here in the wonderful city of Chicago, Illinois. But we are global. We work with corporations, nonprofits, government entities of all sizes at all various stages of their DEI journey. And so this is a new role for me. So I'm truly excited to be here with you today. I was newly promoted, yay me.
Yay.
But I've been in the DEI space for 6 years. Prior to that, I spent 10 years in the social justice advocacy space, working for one of the largest civil rights organizations. And then prior to that, I spent my early career in journalism and marketing, and much of my lived experience, honestly, in those years is what led me to do this work.
Talking about lived experiences. So just to give you a little bit of context, Danata and I have known each other since college, so almost 30 years, but
Don't date us.
we won't tell each other's age. So when we talk about lived experiences, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a part of our lives, not just as people of color, but being a person of color on a predominantly white institution on college campus. So what started our journey together was not being freshmen at school, but the activities that we were a part of.
Yes.
And how that shaped the early formings of DEI.
And we didn't even call it that then. We didn't even know we were being champions.
We just
then.
called it wanting to be a part of something, wanting to feel like we belonged.
Yes.
And you guys, a group of talented young ladies, took this initiative and ran with it.
Yeah, so shout out to Michelle Geddes, Dana Powell. The three of us founded New Our Dance Group on the campus of Illinois State University, February 1994. So yeah, okay, you do the math. You see how old we are. But we started the group because we had tried out for the dance team. And we did not make it, and we did not see ourselves represented.
No representation
On that dance line whatsoever. And instead of just saying, oh man, we didn't make it, we say, you know what? We'll start our own.
Mm-hmm.
We will start our own. We will provide an outlet for women, men of color to dance, to learn, to share, to provide transformative experiences through dance. And I often say DEI is much like dance. It's that connective thread that brings us all together. And so we've known each other a long time.
A long time. Before the Me Too movements, the Black Lives Matters, the Stop Asian American Pacific Islander Hate, all of those things, which really shaped how DEI was formed in the corporate sector. So let's talk about that.
Okay.
So why are people in corporate scared to talk about DEI?
Fear comes from not wanting to offend other people, not wanting to say the wrong thing. Fear also comes from not feeling safe, psychologically safe, to be open, to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to be who they really are. Nobody wants to feel like you're on an island by yourself,
Exactly.
right? So it's that fear. But I also think it goes beyond fear, and it's also frustration. Sometimes, and I say this to my coworkers at work, it's hard being Black and a Black woman sometimes. And sometimes I just don't want to talk about it. I am frustrated.
Especially when you're the only Black woman.
Yes. So there's that frustration of not seeing the needle move further or faster in some cases. And sometimes it's that fatigue. I'm so tired of talking about it because I'm not seeing progress. But that's why you keep doing the work. DEI is a journey, right? There's not really a destination or an endpoint. It's an ongoing journey.
Right. And I also feel frustrated because in my field, 9 times out of 10, I am the only Black woman, the only Black person in a department or on a team. So I have that fatigue. I have that frustration. I've been blessed where I've been in some great organizations where diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a focus. It has been a clear strategy, which led me to those organizations. Let's talk about the 3 things a person can do in their roles. Because oftentimes we know DEI is top down. But when we talk about just a customer service rep or a development associate, an executive assistant, how can they promote and incorporate diversity strategies and activities in their daily tasks?
Yeah, great question. Well, first, I want to say a DEI initiative has to start top down. I really do believe that you need that buy-in and investment, but all of us have to do the work. So 3 things, and they're all kind of integrated, so it may sound repetitive, but you got to walk the talk. If you see something, say something. And not to shame or blame, but to call the behavior out and call the people in. Right? It really is about inclusive behaviors for all of us. And then be an ally. And that goes back to say something, do something. Be an ally for yourselves and for others. Don't just say you about it, be about it. And then the last thing is be a champion. Join an employee resource group or a business resource group. Join an advisory group, a task force, a council, whatever nomenclature these organizations are using. Be a part of the solution. And it doesn't have to be that formal. Again, it's how do you show up at work for yourself and for others?
So the past few years, we've been talking about DEI heavy. And there have been, in the woke culture, there is I'm tired of educating my white counterparts or my non-Black counterparts on DEI or just the lived experiences that I've had to go through just before I get to the office. But how do we engage them and get them back on track with see something, say something, educating our peers, and being a part of the solution?
Ooh, that's a loaded one. Wow. I think it really goes back to being an ally and being a champion. And first of all, we as people of color, we can't be the do all, say all. We don't represent. I can't talk about what you may feel, right? Because your experience is quite different than mine. But what we can do is really just be honest in the moment when we're comfortable and talk about our experiences. Because really, I think when people get invested in DEI is when they have a personal connection to. For instance, I've worked with clients who, they say DEI is about everybody else, not me, the white men. DEI is about everybody, but not me. But it is, because we all have different dimensions of difference, right? And so I had we worked with a particular client who he couldn't really understand his DEI story until he started to realize DEI is not just about race. It's about age. It's about gender. It's about sexual orientation, gender identity, veteran status, disability, so on and so forth. And so he had a child that had a disability. And that made the connection for him about why DEI is important. Accessibility, accommodations. When you broaden the scope of what DEI is, I think that's what brings understanding and awareness.
Yeah, I think we have to remember that DEI, it's much, much older than 2020.
Oh, yes.
it's rooted in the 60s with the Anti-Discrimination Acts, the Civil Rights Act, the Equal Pay Act, and then you have the Age Discrimination Act. So all of those things has shaped what DEI is today. The goal is we would have seen it evolved, and I think we have. I think we've made significant strides. And when we talk about lived experiences, again, and how we can be a part of the solution, no matter how small. I will never forget 3 years ago when our city was being vandalized and burned because of the act I shall not name. I was in the grocery store because I live in the southwest suburbs, so I really wasn't touched or affected. But I was talking to someone who was standing next to me who had to travel 20 to 30 minutes just to go to the grocery store because hers was burned down. And I went to the office the next day and I said, I wasn't affected, but I can only imagine how my colleagues who live, on the west side of Chicago, how they were affected. And they had to come to work. They had to show up for work the next day or the same day and work and function. So I think it was an eye-opener for my colleagues, my senior leadership team, and the frustration immediately left because I saw action. I saw a steering committee being created. They had Black Lives Matter, in support, in the windows. So I appreciated the acknowledgement that our staff is going through something.
Yeah. If you don't mind, you said not naming a specific event, but I think it's important that you do, because when you put faces to things, it really becomes real.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just oh, that happened. No, something terrible did happen. And unfortunately, I don't know which event you're talking about because so many have happened.
Exactly. But I was talking about the George Floyd.
Oh, George Floyd's public execution. Absolutely. We talk about that.
Yeah.
At work, we put name to it. I think one of the things that's important is that we don't run away from the truth, that we call it what it is. And we give voice to it, right? We bring attention to it. And of course, there was a lot of conversation around the looting, around the things that happened. And we all can have our own perspective about what's right, what's wrong. But at the end of the day, we need to have spaces where we can talk about it and why we are personally affected, how that impacts us at work, right? Because that's important.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to give voice to it, give you the,
Thank you.
I won't say the courage, but give voice to it.
And I'm reminded of it. It's funny, but I am reminded of it. And I was literally reminded of it in an interview I did for a job. And, because I'm the only Black person in the room for this interview, and the people who are interviewing me are not. And I just, kind of glanced over it, didn't mention any specifics. And then the woman interviewing me, she said, "Oh, you mean George Floyd's execution, his public execution?"
Yes.
I mean, she was so forward with it. And we started talking about culture. It just flowed right into that. And I was like, okay, this is a place I want to be.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, you said, diversity, it's top down. I would love for it to see it be bottom up, and not necessarily implementing or guiding it, but just being a participant. How we who are not executive leaders or a part of the senior leadership team, how we can be active contributors.
Yeah, and let me just clarify, top down in that leadership is being proactive about really having a sustainable DEI initiative, right? That they're really looking at the policies, the procedures, and the practices within the organization. that we're dismantling systemic racism and bias that is sometimes inherent in organizations. And you may not even be aware of that. That's why people call us. That's why people call Inquest, because we do these cultural assessments and we help organizations figure out where those things may be. And you may not even know they exist, right? But from bottom up, our responsibility, if you're not in leadership, is to hold leadership accountable. Hold them accountable. Ask the questions. Ask the hard questions. Challenge. What is being done? Why aren't we doing this? What are some things that I can do? So not just, I don't see this, I don't see that, but okay,
what I would like to see.
Here's what I like to see. Here's some possible solutions. That's why people join ERGs and BRGs and task force and councils, because you need those diverse perspectives. If we all look the same in the room, or if we all have the same role, we're all on the same level, you're not going to have that diversity of thought in the room.
Exactly.
Right?
So what would you say to an organization who does not want to hire? Because let's be honest, we've seen chief diversity officers being hired across the nation. But what would you say to an organization who does not want to have one person leading DEI strategies? They want it to be organization-wide.
Bravo. It's about all of us. It's about all of us. We all have to do the work. There's not one magic solution to this work. If you have a DEI person in place, great. If you don't, great too. That means all of us are responsible for making these initiatives move forward, right? Wow.
Yeah. So I wasn't expecting that one.
But does it make sense?
It makes sense. Okay. At first, I was like, you need someone to be able to, draft a strategic plan. And see, I'm thinking from that perspective.
And not just one person, right? There may be one person who takes ownership of it getting off the ground, but we all are responsible for making sure it comes to fruition, that there's implementation of that plan. And you may have a committee of people who put together a DEI plan, but at the end of the day, it should be top leadership that's making sure that stuff is moving forward. And then me and you, I'm considered leadership, but hey, anyway, all of us are responsible for making sure those things really happen.
I'm not quite there, but I'm on my way.
Yes, you are. Leadership is both a function and a title.
I will agree with that. So do you think we should be baking DEI into job descriptions?
Absolutely. If an organization is really invested in creating diverse, equitable, inclusive cultures, yes, because you want to attract qualified candidates who want to have that experience at an organization. And I would say it goes beyond the job description. It's across the entire talent life cycle, from attraction to recruitment to hiring to promotion. You should be looking at DEI, the lens of DEI through all of those processes.
So what are some of the mistakes that organizations make when implementing DEI?
Thinking of it as a check the box initiative. We did training, done. We did it. Yay, bravo us. No, like I said earlier, you're never done. It's an ongoing journey. Not having leadership, buy-in, and investment. We talked about that as well. And I think also just not really hearing from everybody in the organization. So if you're not doing post surveys or some sort of evaluation to understand how people are feeling, you never really know what you need to be doing. Right. So you got to hear from everybody. Don't make assumptions about how people are feeling.
You need to know what's not working.
Exactly.
To make it work.
Yeah. You have to know what everybody's experience is to know what are you trying to accomplish, right?
Speaking of trainings, do they really make a difference?
I think they do. And I can't say all trainings make a difference. I think you have to have the right partner who's doing the trainer, whether you're going to a third party or if you're using an internal resource. You got to make sure the right people are facilitating those discussions, because you can do a lot of harm in DEI if you don't know what you're talking about.
And we had a conversation prior where we were talking about my experience with a specific training. It's unconscious bias.
And we didn't do that one, by the way. Let me just.
No,
that wasn't in class.
But I appreciated it. But when I left that training, I felt like I was a bit traumatized. It was about 25, 27 people in that training, and literally only 5 people who were Black.
Okay.
Black. And we're talking about people's biases. We're talking about, and we were looking at pictures, we're talking about what makes you feel threatened. If something happened on campus and we have to talk about a suspect, could you adequately describe them with no bias? And we're looking at pictures of a Black man in a hoodie. And we're asked to, how does that make you feel? And the 5 Black people in the room, we're looking around like, and I'm sure it was not a comfortable environment for the people who were not Black.
Yeah.
So it's just a little PTSD. But
I'm sorry you had that experience.
As we structure diversity trainings, and I know organizations sometimes can't help because they don't have a lot of diversity within their organizations, but should that be a consideration?
Should what be a consideration?
Having the right mix of people. Or what can they do to create that safe space?
Yeah. So, again, sorry you had that experience. Second, I think it's important to have the right content. Really, that should be a co-creation or collaborative process with the organization. And I always say, I sometimes think organizations really should use a third party, because if you're too close to it, you can't see what's happening, right? You may not see the bias in it's happening. We all have bias.
Right.
So let me say that bias, it does not make you a bad person. It's human. We all have bias. Every single one of us. We all have assumptions. We all have preconceived notions about others, even about ourselves. And that's all really connected to our lived experience, where we live, who our parents were, where we grew up, what schools we went to. All of those make up influence, I would say, our bias, right? So, yes, in the room, you want to create a safe space. And again, a lot of times that's if you don't have somebody who's in the organization facilitating those discussions, because you may be afraid of what they may think about what you say. But then also a part of that is, I would say, having dual facilitation in the room. You want to have diverse facilitators in the room, mixed gender, mixed race, different sexual orientation, different gender identity, whatever that is. You want to have that diversity in front of the room. You want to practice what you're preaching. But I think also a part of that is making sure it's an interactive experience, hearing from the people in the room. And I don't know if in that training there was probing around what you all were feeling or experiencing.
There was probing, but again, no one felt comfortable to say anything.
Okay.
It was just a really uncomfortable environment. I mean, and speaking for myself, I didn't feel comfortable talking, speaking to the pictures, because, whether it's a white man in a hoodie or a Black man in a hoodie, I'm going to be cautious walking down the street next to either one of them. But I could see the looks on some of my colleagues' faces where it was like, do I really want to speak to this? Do I want to be the first person speaking? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I offend someone? And, as parents, we talk about just say it. Right. As coworkers, we say to our teammates, just say it. Don't worry about the fear yet. When it comes to DEI, when it comes to race, discrimination, all of those things, there is that real fear.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not going to be solved overnight. And I'm hoping that you gave that feedback to your
Oh, I
organization.
did.
Oh, good. And that's one step of hopefully making sure someone else doesn't
At my
have.
new organization, we were talking about unconscious bias, and I told them my experience, and they were like, "Oh, well, we'll have to look at this very differently to make sure no one walks out of there, traumatized."
Yeah. And that's part of who was on the committee, who reviewed that content before it went out. And if it wasn't a diverse slate of folks looking at that, something could have been missed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. That's a terrible experience.
So when we talk to someone like me, who has that, not fear of diversity trainings, but the apprehension, or not even a full understanding of why me as a person of color, why do I need to go to diversity trainings? What do you say?
I said this earlier. It's not about just one group of people or one community of people. Diversity, equity, inclusion is about all of us. Yes, even the white men, because there's different dimensions of diversity, your education, your background, where you grew up, again, disability, veteran status. It's all of that. We all have different cultural identifiers. I'm not just one thing. I'm not just Black. I'm not just a woman. I'm a divorcee. I'm not a single parent because Miles has a great dad. But anyway, I'm all these things, right? All these things make up who I am. So it's important that we go to this training so we learn more about ourselves and one another. How can we better connect at work? It could be as simple as, please don't schedule a meeting for me before 9 a.m.
Or how do I, as a Black woman, and you're sending me into an office to talk about why I'm not getting something that I need by the deadline to a white man. How all of those things have shaped me as a woman.
Yeah, you have to tell your story
woman.
So people can understand where you're coming from, what's your perspective, why you do what you do, and the ways that you do it.
Exactly. So we have 1 minute to wrap up. So very quickly, let's recap 5 things that people can do to be contributors to their organization's DEI goals. So educate yourself.
Absolutely.
Lead by example by talking about your lived experiences and perspectives. Try not to embarrass or close people down by just saying, you can't say that.
Yeah, call out the behavior, call the people in.
Exactly. Start from the position that people are not offensive on purpose.
Yes.
And finally, ask the hard questions.
Ask the hard questions, you have to. Great. I love those.
Thank you so much for joining me today on DIY, DEI, Danata. DIY, DEI, where we continue the conversations on breaking down myths, barriers, and stereotypes to DEI and building up individuals so that they can properly contribute to their organization's DEI goals.